They told us it never happened, that no tape was ever made, that if there ever was an interview, it was lost, forgotten, misplaced in some dusty archive no one could ever trace. But stories have a way of surviving, even when every effort is made to erase them. What you're about to hear was never aired, never cited, never published in any official biography. And yet, it exists. The voice on that tape doesn't belong to just anyone. It's Richard Alpert. But by 1996, the world knew him as Ram Dass, mystic, teacher, spiritual pioneer, a man who once taught psychology at Harvard, and then abandoned it all in pursuit of something the textbooks couldn't explain. Tonight, we're not presenting you a documentary. We're not analyzing evidence. We're stepping into something else entirely. An encounter. A 48-minute conversation recorded in a private hotel room in the Pacific Palisades. Never released, never verified, and almost completely erased. Until now. This isn't about beliefs. This isn't about religion. This is about what remains when everything else falls away. One tape, one man, one story. And if what he said is true, then death isn't what we thought, and neither are we. Welcome to Voices from the Other Side. The official setting? A hotel room on the 3rd floor, Pacific Palisades. Summer 1996. No camera crew, no microphones, no studio lights. Just a tape recorder, analog, handheld, placed between 2 chairs. We know this because the beginning of the recording captures the creak of wood, a cough, and the faint sound of someone sitting down. Then silence. The voice, his voice, Ram Dass. It starts simple, measured. His tone is calm, like someone who knows he has no audience, as if he isn't performing, but remembering. He speaks about his time in India, about Neem Karoli Baba, the guru who called him to stillness. He talks about how LSD shattered his identity and how silence put him back together. At first, it's the usual themes: love, service, surrender. But then, something shifts. At minute 17, the interviewer asks a question. It's hard to make out. The tape crackles. But it's something like, "What changed in you after the stroke?" There's a pause. Then Ram Dass says it. The moment my heart stopped, I wasn't afraid, I wasn't even surprised, I was returned. That's when the atmosphere on the tape becomes different. The quality of his voice changes, not in volume, but in depth, as if he's no longer describing something, but reliving it. It wasn't black, it wasn't light either. Not in the way we know it. It was being known, completely, all at once. He doesn't describe a tunnel. No relatives, no judgment, no God in a traditional sense. What he describes is a kind of dissolution. There was no me. There was only the memory of me, being held like a note in a song. At this point, the interviewer, whose voice is still unidentified, asks, "Were you watching it happen?" Ram Dass laughs, not with amusement, but with clarity, a recognition. Number, I wasn't watching. There was no observer. There was no observing. There was knowing. And knowing had no source. It's hard to explain what happens next because the words on the tape don't follow a linear path. He begins speaking in loops, repeating certain phrases, pausing. Long, drawn-out silences, and then continuing as if he had never stopped. Time is a trick we agreed to believe, but when the body paused, time let go of me, and I didn't fall. I was absorbed. He refers to something he calls the softening. He says that when he let go, it wasn't a release, it was a reunion. It was familiar, not in memory, but in essence. I've never been more myself than when I wasn't anyone. The tape was allegedly recovered from a private collection in San Francisco, unmarked except for the label RD, Do Not Circulate. No one knows who made the original copy or why. But what stands out, even in this first part, is the sense of peace in his words. Not serenity in the spiritual sense, but peace like an ending of friction. What I feared as loss was simply the dissolving of a name. I didn't stop existing. I stopped needing to. There are no myths here, no grand narratives, just a man describing something that language wasn't built for. And yet, the words come, one after another, like they've been waiting to be spoken for years. And just before the tape transitions into its second half, Ram Dass says something that frames everything that follows. If you're listening to this, it means you already knew. You just forgot. Click. The sound of the tape shifting. The room still quiet. But something is about to change. Soft static, then his voice again. Slower now. I didn't go anywhere. I returned, and in returning, I remembered. This is where the tape diverges from every known account of Ram Dass's teachings. He begins to speak not just about what he experienced, but what he was shown. Not by a being, not by a guide, but by what he calls the field. The field wasn't light, it wasn't sound, it was meaning, without form. Everything I'd lived was laid out before me, but not like a film, like resonance, like the emotional echo of every choice I had ever made. He pauses, you can hear him breathing. You can hear the recorder hum. And then, and what mattered most, what held the most weight, wasn't what I achieved, it was what I touched, how I made people feel when they were most afraid. At this point, the interviewer gently asks, "Were you judged?" Again, that soft, almost amused laugh. There was no judgment, just clarity, like holding a crystal up to the sun and seeing every fracture, every light refraction, every imperfection, all at once, but without shame. Shame can't exist when there is only truth. He describes what he calls the mirror of return, a space where the soul, free from the body, free from roles, free from name, is able to feel its entire human life again, but not from its own perspective. I felt every joy I ever gave. I felt every fear I ever caused, not remembered. Felt. I was the receiver of everything I had sent out. This is the turning point of the recording. He shifts from describing an event to delivering a message. This life, it's not about becoming. It's about remembering. You don't come here to add something to yourself. You come here to strip away everything that isn't you, until all that's left is love. For a moment, there's a click, a shift in the tape. It almost sounds like it skips, or like someone touched the recorder. Then the voice resumes. Quieter now, whispering. Do you know why it's hard? Because you're playing with the lights off. You chose to forget, on purpose. So when you remember sound, it means something. He talks about what he calls the agreement, called the soul's pre-life contract. Before you came here, you knew, you saw every challenge, every grief, every goodbye, and you still said yes. According to Ram Dass, we choose more than just our parents or our bodies. We choose the curriculum. You chose heartbreak. You chose confusion. You chose moments when everything would fall apart because your soul wanted to wake up. And the alarm clock for the soul is often pain. The interviewer asks, "So, are we here to suffer?" "No," he replies with absolute stillness in his voice. "You're not here to suffer, you're here to transcend it. Suffering is the bridge. You don't build a home on it, but you must cross it." He describes what it felt like to stand at what he calls the edge of embodiment, the moment before choosing to return. It was like standing at the top of a wave that had not yet crashed, all potential, all power. And the moment I said yet, I became small again. I became a story. Then he speaks about why he came back. They asked me without words, "Do you want to remember this or live it again?" And I said, "Let me live it again, but this time I'll remember a little more." And that's when he says the line that made this tape, this forbidden, nearly erased piece of history, so dangerous. You are not a victim of life. You are the author, pretending not to know the plot. Silence, no commentary. Just the weight of that sentence filling the room. The interviewer doesn't respond. And then Ram Dass, voice shaking slightly, says, "We come here not to change the world, but to remember who we are. And in remembering, the world begins to change around us." At this point, it's unclear if the tape is nearing the end or simply entering its final act. But one thing is certain. This isn't a man preaching. This is a man revealing. And what he'd reveal, Nananum, might just change everything you thought you knew about death and life and you. Soft static again. Then, silence. A new voice speaks. The interviewer, almost a whisper. "If you could say one thing to the people still afraid of death, what would it be?" Ram Dass breathes in. There is a long pause, and then, "There is nothing to fear. Death is not the end. It is the thinning of the veil. It is not darkness, it is light so bright your eyes of flesh cannot see it." He begins to speak faster now, not rushed but charged, as if something in him has broken open, as if the memory is too powerful to hold back. "We are not these bones, we are not these names, we are sparks pretending to be people. And then, when I died, I remembered my name. Not Richard, not Ram Dass, the real name, the one made of vibration, the one that can only be spoken in silence." The interviewer asks, stunned, "Can you describe what it felt like?" Ram Dass laughs again, not because it's funny, but because it's impossible. "It felt like home, like being held by something that had waited for me forever. It knew everything, and it judged nothing." He begins to speak about the others, not angels, not ancestors, not beings, but presences. They didn't have faces, they had frequencies, each one a lesson I had once failed, now returning in love. They didn't speak, they reminded. He describes a presence that stood beside him, not guiding but echoing. She was the part of me that had always known the truth, and she said, not in words but in light, "Now that you've seen, will you forget again?" This moment breaks something in the recording. There's a slight crackle. The tape becomes warped. For a few seconds, his voice is unintelligible. Then it clears, and Ram Dass speaks one final message. "You are not here to be perfect. You are here to remember." He explains that all of life is a play, but not a meaningless one. It is sacred theater, where the soul writes the script, plays every role, and forgets the ending, so it can cry at the climax. He pauses, and then, "You think awakening is a moment, but it's not. It's 1,000 small choices: to be present instead of asleep, to feel instead of numb, to forgive instead of hold on." He speaks of people we love and people we lose. They don't leave, they just move behind the curtain. And sometimes, if your heart is quiet enough, you can feel their hand in yours. Then comes the line that would never be published, the one the editors redacted, the one too dangerous to be spoken. "If people knew what we really are, they couldn't be controlled anymore." The interviewer asks, barely audible, Why was this never aired? Ram Dass replies, because freedom doesn't sell. Because awakening breaks systems. Because a person who remembers they are light will never again live in a cage. There is silence again, a single sound, the click of the recorder shutting off. But just before it ends, one final whisper. If you've listened this far, you already knew. You didn't need my words, you only needed a mirror. The screen fades to black, and a single phrase appears in white text. I didn't die, I just remembered. This interview was never released. Ram Dass never mentioned it again. Not in books, not in talks, not even in private conversations. But after 1996, something in his voice changed. He stopped saying I. He started saying presence. He no longer spoke like someone who believed, but like someone who remembered. The only known copy of the recording vanished in 2007. Officially, due to copyright issues. Unofficially, because it couldn't be proven. And yet, it couldn't be forgotten either. Because this wasn't about death. It was about the dissolution of the self. About what remains when the story of you ends. And if you've listened this far, maybe you felt it too, where there used to be a boundary, now there's only stillness. And in that stillness, you still exist. You don't die. You simply stop being the one who thought they were alive.